He did not go to the prison to find blood. He went because the bakery's truck stalled again, and the morning heat was already loading its palm on the city's neck. Someone had to carry the bread the last stretch. Ibrahim balanced the woven crate against his rib cage and stepped through the outer gate of Maison d'Arrêt Coulé, the iron mouth of it yawning, bored, indifferent. He had a delivery chit in his breast pocket, stamped in blue, proof that he belonged on the safe side of the bars. He had learned to lower his gaze with the guards and lift it with the nurses, a choreography of survival that every vendor in the quarter knew by heart. The asphalt inside shone like water. He kept his breath even. Then he heard a cough from behind the clinic grill. Not the cough itself, but the way it landed, a pattern his childhood recognized faster than any face. He turned and saw his sister, Awa, eyes in a pool of shadow, mouth tightening as if it held a seam that would split if she moved too fast. For a second, silence became a kind of siren. She said his name without sound, and he answered out loud like a foolish man, terrible with hope. A guard raised 2 fingers, the quiet warning that meant keep moving or pay. Ibrahim's feet moved, but the crate tilted as if it meant to kneel. Later he would remember the exact things the moment placed on the table. The folded cloth around Awa's shoulder, the stamp on his chit, the key ring at the guard's belt like a rosary of doors. Now he saw only the ledger left open on a desk, a column labeled Prises en charge, another labeled Motif. Beside Awa's name, if it was hers, a line of dashes. He asked the nearest nurse if she was ill. The nurse, a thin woman with a neat scarf and an ID badge that spelled Mariama, met his eyes the way some people hand over a cup of water. No flourish, all mercy. "She's here," she said, and nothing else. That was how Ibrahim understood that inside the walls, words and breath were rationed like breakfast. The gate was the first character in this story, and it knew its role. Block the relief with politeness. Sell the air back to the desperate one, breath at a time. The deputy warden, Sori, perfected that politeness into a craft. He intercepted Ibrahim before the vendor reached the exit and gently removed the thought of a conversation from his mouth. "Deliveries go through the kitchen, not the clinic," Sori said, voice soft as powdered sugar. "And relatives go through the magistrate, not my courtyard." He didn't ask whose face had rung the bell in Ibrahim's chest. He pointed to the external signboard, where rules were printed in weather-beaten French. They were the kind of rules that looked like safety and behaved like toll booths. Ibrahim nodded, because the morning still had to end, because bread went stale and rent waited. But the cough had already locked a door inside him. He would return, and the gate, which had swallowed so many like a habit, would have to learn a new language. By noon, he had carried the crate back empty, and the city's ordinary commerce had reasserted itself with its coins and chalk marks and plastic chairs under neem shade. His mother's phone shook on the table like a trapped insect. He did not tell her yet. He sat, fingers drumming the old tile, and let the facts arrange themselves with the quiet of someone who knows the price of panic. Awa had disappeared 6 nights ago, a message from a neighbor said, picked up near the bus stand after a scuffle about a missing handbag that was never found. No one had registered her at the commissariat. The neighbor had asked, and a clerk had shrugged. The breath inside Ibrahim shortened, but stubborn men learned to stretch their lungs with prayer. He closed his eyes, pictured his sister's hand over their father's grave the year before, fingers pressed to dusty marble like she could keep a promise warm by touch alone. It was that same hand, now resting on iron. He went back before evening call to the prison gate with no bread, just the grit of family law. The guard on duty was new and made a ceremony of reading the rules aloud, as if reading them could absolve him. For visits, the boy said, you need proof of parentage, a stamp from the magistrate, the docket number, and the purchase of a visitor card. The list was a grid of doors that each opened into another line. What is her docket number? Ibrahim asked, and the boy smiled, not cruel, just trained. And you get that at the registry. Across town, Sori appeared again as if conjured. He had a way of stepping through any conversation like a soft hinge. Do the steps, he said. The steps are the steps. He lifted a hand toward the exit, like a blessing. The sun slid behind the wall. Ibrahim, the baker who didn't bake, the brother who had not been told, walked out and began to memorize the shape of the obstacle. The next breath would not be spent in pleading. It would be invested in the work of breaking a pattern. The first line at the registry was a hallway pretending to be a snake. Paper clipped to paper, bodies clipped to patients, a ceiling fan ticking like a metronome that couldn't keep the beat. Ibrahim learned how the city stored time, in folders. He submitted his request in clear handwriting and waited until a clerk with cuffed sleeves slid open a hatch and asked for a docket number he didn't have. I am here to obtain it, he said, and the clerk's face emptied like a bowl thrown to a dog. "Then you require an opening fee," the clerk said, and wrote a number that looked like a lie across a receipt that looked official. The currency sign was CFA. The seal was smudged, and the phone on the desk buzzed with a WhatsApp voice note that began mid-laughter. The clerk had a small brass doorbell he rang every time he wanted the junior runners to approach. Door created by a finger. Door answered by a boy. Gatekeeping reduced to a ringtone. He paid because rage is a poor locksmith. The ledger swallowed his money and left no footprint in ink. He wrote Awa's name again, spelled it the way their father liked, the way that anchored it to a childhood disease she had survived. But the clerk found a file that belonged to a different woman, then another with a man's name and a similar date. "Do you know the arresting officer?" the clerk asked, as if Ibrahim had been present at his sister's capture and corrected the choreography. A runner returned with a stack of photocopies bound with kind twine. One of them carried a hand-scribbled number next to an intake stamp from Maison d'Arrêt Coulé, a stamp brash with fresh ink like a flag. Ibrahim copied the number. He asked when a hearing would be scheduled. The clerk said, "Hearings are not scheduled when the docket is not finalized." The cuff shifted and revealed a threadbare bangle. The man was not a villain. He was a hungry participant. Still, the mechanism worked through him. He took the number to the prison and found the nurse again. Mariama, distributing paracetamol like mints and measuring blood pressure with a cuff as old as the last decade. She did not pretend not to know him. She tilted her head toward a corner of the clinic where a desk calendar lied itself into yesterday, and a cracked computer monitor repeated the ministry's logo like a prayer wheel. "You should not have seen her," she said. "But I am glad. Now you won't abandon the gate." She told him Awa had a fever, that she was new to the wing, that intake had recorded no charge beyond investigative hold, that her period had come behind the bars, and someone had had to barter for pads with cigarettes from the canteen. Mariama said this with softness, but not apology, because apology implies the power to repair, and what she had was proximity. She slid a folded paper toward him with the names of 2 women who had been held 3 months on hold, while the docket waited to be blessed. She said it as if describing a drought. The deputy warden appeared again because he had the sense for disturbances. He had a way of arriving after the truth like a lid. "Vendor," he addressed Ibrahim, stripping him back to the role that afforded limited breathing rights. "You have no access. We cannot disrupt order to accommodate sentiment." Order was his favorite word. It looked good on the white of a rulebook. Ibrahim planted the docket number like a flag. She is Awa Diarra, held under investigative hold. Her docket is 19K327. The number made a small wind. Sori did not flinch. He pointed to a wooden cabinet with a safe inside it, the place where visitor cards were stored. "Order," he repeated, "requires cards and countersigns. You will purchase the card, return tomorrow, queue, perhaps then a 10-minute preview of your sentiment will be allowed. And do not bring anything without receipts. We enforce receipts?" He smiled as the ledger on the wall watched. That night, Ibrahim went to the radio station because his neighborhood taught him there are 2 courts in the city, the one with wooden benches, and the one with a tin roof, and a host whose voice can hold a town. The evening call-in show was about roadworks until Ibrahim threaded his story into traffic. He spoke plainly, the way men speak when they care more about being understood than being admired. He did not call anyone a thief. He said the gate did not know how to tell the difference between a case and a person. He asked where the receipts went. He asked if investigative hold was a law he could read. The host let the silence stretch after each question like a length of rope, and the listeners climbed it. A retired guard phoned and said there had been hold practices for years, a way to keep the numbers up for budget review. A market chairwoman called to say the women in her cooperative had started pooling money for visitor cards because the price rose on Fridays. The city's WhatsApp groups, that humming afterlife of every rumor, began to carry his sister's name along with 10 others and then 20. Screens lit up with screenshots of receipts that did not bear the Treasury's watermark. The escalation was not fire. It was air coalescing, breaths deciding to align. Someone sent the clip to a staffer in the governor's office. Someone else forwarded it to a legal clinic that had no budget but plenty of attention. Mariama listened after her shift and held the phone to the window where prison light drained the color from everything. The deputy warden, awake later than his family thought decent, scanned a group chat with the wardens of the region, their messages small and precise and defensive. "Order must be maintained," one wrote. They all pressed the word like a coin. In the morning, someone in a suit would appear and walk the length of the outer gate and the inner gate and the space between them where people forget how to breathe. The story had already picked a direction. The leader did not arrive with drums, not even with sirens. He came in a Navy car whose paint had lost some brightness to the sun. The driver's eyes stayed with the road like a prayer. He stepped out alone, straightened his cuffs, and glanced at the signboard the way a mason tests a wall with a knuckle. Those who work under roofs learn to understand wood by sound. He thanked the guard before the guard had time to decide if thanks were permitted. The man had a name badge. The leader read it out loud, and the guard relaxed a millimeter. It was this sort of arithmetic, small, accumulative, that would decide the day. The leader asked to see the ledger, the intake book, the registry of visitor cards, the canteen receipts. Sori produced them with a showman's efficiency. He had always believed paper could be made to testify only in the direction you pointed it. The books came to the table like a procession of doors. The leader ran a finger down columns. He paused at the word hold. He asked what statute number corresponded. Sori replied with the ease of a man who has given this answer many times and been thanked for its neatness. Article 12 allows temporary retention pending clarification, he said. The leader nodded and asked for the article. Sori brought a photocopy that had suffered in 100 folders and glowed with the familiarity of a liar. The leader read aloud the clause that required immediate judicial notification within 24 hours. He did not raise his voice. He folded the page, placed it beside the ledger, and let the two stare at each other like mirrors that disagreed. He asked to walk the entry path as a detainee would. Between the outer gate and the registry window, he said, I want to feel the distance. He took off his jacket, passed it to his aide, a woman named Kadiatu, who carried a notebook with tabs like city flags, and stepped under the arch as the sun revised its position. The guard at the arch checked his pockets, hesitated over the phone, then returned it with a shrug that has undone many old habits faster than decrees. Keep it, the leader said. A person should be allowed one voice. He stood at the registry window while a clerk recited standard intake questions. He asked the clerk to stop. He asked a new question. Where's the breath in this? He said. Between your question and her answer, where's the place she can breathe? The clerk looked down, then nodded as if he too had once been a man at a window. In the clinic, the leader washed his hands and greeted Mariama. He looked at the blood pressure cuff that stuck and the cracked monitor that repeated a logo like superstition. He listened to the cuff refuse to adjust. Oh, we treat first, and then we argue about procurement, he said, the old health doctrine adapted for prison. He asked Mariama to show him the women's wing through the grill. He had no authority to push the door. He had the right to name what he saw. Awa did not know him but watched the way he watched the grills. He bent to the visitor's slit and spoke to the women through a hole made to reduce voices to paperwork. There is a sequence, he said, as if speaking to himself, and we have put the ledger before the breath. Awa's eyes did not ask for a miracle. They asked for the chance to exist in the order of things. He returned to the courtyard and asked Sori for a small table and 2 chairs to be placed beneath the neem tree by the outer gate. From now, he said, we add a piece to the entry ritual. We call it the listening bench. Before any card is sold or fee requested, a detainee or family member will sit here, tell a complete story in ordinary words, and receive a written intake note with a case number, a tick box indicating whether a charge exists, and the statute cited. If there is no statute, detention stops. If there is a statute, we inform the magistrate within the hour. Sori tried to smile it away as theater. The leader did not push. He placed his hand over the ledger, a gesture not of seizure but of ownership of responsibility. We reorder the sequence, he said. Breath before ledger, here before hold. Kadiatu opened her notebook and read out a draft of the protocol that she had already named, because names anchor habits. The golden hour of justice, she said. Within 60 minutes of intake, 3 things happen. Medical check, legal charge citation, family contact attempt. The gate is measured not by how few pass, but by how they pass. The words felt large now. They would have to be reduced to routine later. The leader asked to meet with the union representative for guards, and when the man arrived, wrinkled and weary, he thanked him for the nights already endured. This is not an accusation against those who stand in the sun, he said. It is a line drawn against a payment that rewards delay. If we pay per person per day, our doors will learn to prefer a crowd. By dusk, the listening bench had a laminated sign in 2 languages, and a pen tied to it with string like an honest tool. The first woman to sit there was not Awa, but a grandmother with a list of names like a prayer chain. The guard who took her statement wrote carefully and, unbidden, underlined the part where she said, "No charge shown." The leader left without fanfare. His car coughed and merged with traffic. He had not freed anyone yet. He had moved the first door. If you want to repair a gate, you first ask what it counts. Kadiatu gathered receipts like shells and found they were more like teeth. The canteen logs showed purchases that resold pads and paracetamol at a profit to the desperate. the prophet recorded as facilitation. The visitor card ledger listed numbers that leaped and then stopped on Fridays. The intake book repeated hold with a rhythm that matched payday at the registry. The audit team borrowed a classroom at the magistrate's school, chalkboard still covered with Latin phrases that belonged to the old world of law, where words were arranged like bricks. They laid out the documents in an order that honored a human path rather than a bureaucratic obsession. Intake, health, charge, contact. They set aside everything that did not serve this path. The table filled with stateless paper. They went looking for the statute Sorry had waved like a banner. The clause, Article 12, contained the verb retenir with a narrow waist. Retain only for the time necessary to confirm identity and notify a magistrate within 24 hours. The word had been stretched by habit until it became a net. Kadiatu printed the page, highlighted the parts that hurt, and taped it to the front of the registry window. A WhatsApp photo of that page toured the city. The caption said, "Read what they read to you." The radio host invited a magistrate who brought a copy of the code and read aloud the same lines, then turned the page and read the penalties for unlawful detention. The clip became a pillar in people's phones. What the documents could not confess, the phones did. A warders group chat contained phrases like "park them until Monday" and "no docket, no problem," until they pay the card. A runner from the registry bragged about oil for dry hinges with a string of laughing emojis. Someone forwarded a voice note of a clerk explaining to a cousin how to use investigative hold as an umbrella. The investigation operated like an X-ray that allowed everyone to see the bone. No single villain sat in the center. There was instead a ring of small appetites fed by a per diem policy that tied funding to headcount and a visitor card system that made the first answer to grief a demand for cash. Awa's file, when held up to light, showed what most did. An intake stamp, a name spelled correctly, a line for charge left blank. Another for magistrate notified, bearing a check mark in a different hand than the rest of the page. Mariama recognized the ink as belonging to the night guard who sold cigarettes in small lots. It was not a conspiracy. It was a convenience that hardened into a wall. Kadiatu put the file next to two other women held for weeks without a charge. She insisted the audit compare their stories with the ledger dates and the canteen bills. Not to shame, she said, but to expose the mechanism. The mechanism is the villain we can prosecute. The leader asked the governor for use of the foyer of the old municipal hall, and within a week, a public board stood there, 3 lines plotted each day in chalk that could be seen from the street. Door-to-charge minutes. Uncharged detainees. Complaints resolved, 24. They called it the gate board. People walking to market read the lines and nodded, and the city discovered an odd thing. Numbers can behave like air if you open a window. A QR code printed under the board linked to a simple site with the same lines, updated before noon, unknown to rumor but adopted by trust. The deputy warden went pale the first time he stood before the board and watched a boy trace a finger along uncharged detainees, like a child following the river on a map. Sorry. Defended himself in a memo that quoted the budget guidelines and included a table that showed late disbursements from the ministry. He was not wrong. Delays from above starved institutions and made room for petty tolls. The leader attached the memo to the audit file and underlined the line about per capita supplements. "We will remove the perverse incentive," he wrote in the margin, not as thunder, but as diagnosis. At a press briefing under a low-ceiling fan that threatened decapitation all summer, he announced that the prison would operate under a new funding model for a pilot period, a fixed budget baseline plus a small bonus tied to the inverse of average detention without charge. The worse the gate behaved, the less money it received. The better it breathed, the more it could afford to fix the cuff and the monitor. Money would teach the doors to prefer emptiness over crowd. The legal clinic filed a habeas petition for Awa and 2 others, attaching photocopies of the board and the statute, attaching WhatsApp screenshots with numbers redacted to respect the clinic's ethics while still telling the truth. It was a modern kind of exposure, plain, almost boring, with receipts lined up like small boxes in a field. When the magistrate read the file, he did not perform outrage. He signed an order. He sent a clerk with it to the gate and asked the guard to read it aloud. The guard did, voice steady, and folded the paper with care the way his father had folded funeral notices. The women heard the words through iron. Outside, a boy chalked a new number on the board, then wiped it, then chalked it again. The city held its breath on the count of a slow, sober heartbeat. Exposure is not fireworks. It is naming the door and placing a hand on it together. Systems do not shift because of a speech. They shift because routine changes clothes. The golden hour of justice was printed on a single sheet and taped to places where boredom lived. The registry window, the clinic door, the office where guards took tea. 3 lines, 3 obligations, 3 places a human could catch breath. Within 60 minutes of intake, cite the charge and statute or release, conduct a medical check, attempt family contact and record result. The sheet was so simple that it embarrassed people who had spent careers conjuring complexity to seem important. The deputy warden performed annoyance as if it were philosophy. "We are not paramedics," he said. "We cannot be bound to a clock." The leader did not argue. He placed a small digital timer on the registry desk, the kind used in kitchens, and pressed start when a new person arrived. Neuroscience would call it a nudge. In this city, it was an audible prayer. The per diem bonus evaporated. In its place, a baseline budget arrived, not lavish but predictable, and a small incentive tied to the gate board's inverse numbers. The first month, the line for door-to-charge minutes collapsed like a hammock cut loose. The second month, it climbed on a Monday when a magistrate fell ill. The board called it out without drama, and a replacement rotation was arranged as if this had always been normal. Complaints arrived by the new channel, a short code on WhatsApp, and a paper box at the gate with a slit, and a posted service level agreement promised responses within 24 hours. The agreement was not a poem, it was a calendar with muscles. Kadiatu assigned 2 interns to log, categorize, and track complaints to closure. They worked with the satisfaction of waiters in a rush who can see the kitchen finally built for heat. The training drill was ridiculous in the way the best drills are. They called it the gate walk. Once a week, every guard had to walk the exact path a detainee walks, through the outer gate, to the registry, to the clinic, to the visitor's slit. They carried a dossier with blank lines that forced them to ask the sequence aloud. Name, charge, statute, notify. Breath became visible. The guards laughed at first, then fell quiet when they realized how far it was from the outer gate to the clinic when your hands were behind your back. Mariama watched them arrive. She practiced not saying, "I told you." Instead, she offered water and pointed to the blood pressure cuff that now belonged to the present and did not lie. The reforms had teeth in 2 places that matter: pockets and pride. A small disciplinary board reviewed cases where hold had been used in the last 6 months. It issued reprimands, then suspensions, then a transfer that surprised no one. The transfer was not exile. It was a message folded into a routine. The governor's office issued a memo banning visitor cards as a revenue item. Identification would be free, a printed slip generated by a donated tablet that had just 3 buttons and a solar charger glued to its back. The canteen contracts were rewritten to remove facilitation margins and add a ceiling on prices for essentials. Profit would come from choice, not desperation. Every change appeared on the gate board, which began to build reputation like a bridge builds trust, bolt by bolt. Ibrahim saw his sister through the visitor's slit with a card that cost nothing and a docket that now contained a statute number with its breathing period. The prosecutor reviewed the case and, lacking evidence beyond rumor and a vanished handbag that belonged to an employer's cousin who had already left town, declined to pursue. He did not perform humility. He signed and moved on. Awa's release was not a miracle. It was a mechanism finally functioning under light. She walked out in a dress that Mariama had laundered in the staff sink. At the outer gate, the guard with the name badge Ibrahim had learned spoke a casual bonne chance that carried the awkwardness of someone relearning a language. Ibrahim took one breath, then another, measured like a carpenter marking a board. He did not thank the leader. He thanked the nurse and the clerk who had underlined "no charge shown" on the listening bench's first day. He bought bread for the widow's lane and handed the receipt to no one. The city, which had survived worse and therefore trusted nothing, checked the board each morning and adjusted its skepticism as one adjusts a cap in wind. By the 3rd week, the line for uncharged detainees dipped below a number old wardens had called impossible. The radio host grew bored of repeating the protocol and moved on to potholes. This was the surest sign of victory. Routine became its own advertisement. Kadiatu trained a clerk from the neighboring district on the dashboard entry. She did it without music. She left him with a laminated card that explained in simple language how to replace a broken timer and who to call when the web page didn't refresh by noon. Accountability had learned to be boring. That, more than the roar of a press conference, is what the corrupt fear. In the months that followed, the door learned to open without spectacle. The wooden bell at the registry window rang less because people stopped needing to announce themselves like intruders to their own lives. The listening bench kept its laminate. People began to set their elbows on it, to place plastic folders and cheap pens on it, with the absent-minded confidence that belongs to furniture that will be there tomorrow. The board in the municipal hall grew smudged at the edges where market boys leaned after errands. A tailor chalked the day's numbers next to his price list as if they were another measure of cloth. The QR code survived a rainy season. Someone made a habit of wiping it with a sleeve. Awa found work at a cooperative that repaired solar lanterns. Her hands, which had learned to guide a needle over their father's grave, now guided wires into plastic housings with a patience that flirted with art. She kept her visitor slip in a folder labeled Proofs, because the city is a place that sometimes asks you to prove you were wronged. She did not go back to the prison except once, to bring tamarind juice for Mariama on a shift. They did not speak about the clinic grill. They spoke about back pain and herbs and the price of cassava. The comfortable boredom of two women who share a noun, work, settled between them. Ibrahim drifted into a job that did not bruise his lungs. The bakery hired a mechanic for the truck. He took an afternoon shift at the gateboard sometimes, not as an activist, just as a citizen who could explain the lines to people who had questions. His explanations were unlyrical. "This one is minutes from the door to the charge," he would say, tapping the chalked number. "Lower is better. This one is count of people held with no charge. Lower is better. This one is complaints resolved within a day. Higher is better. If you have a complaint, you can use that number." He would point to the WhatsApp code and watch an auntie take a photo for her nephew. He never once said the words, "my sister," not because he was shy of sorrow, but because he preferred that the habit live for reasons beyond him. The deputy warden learned to sign for supplies and to take pride in a line trending the right way. The disciplinary board met monthly until one month there was nothing to discuss. They met anyway out of respect for a calendar. They passed around tea and spoke about school fees. Kadiatu rotated to another portfolio where she discovered the same old problem hiding in a different uniform, a registry where a birth took 6 desks to become official. She wrote "breath before ledger" on a page and laughed at herself, half in exhaustion, half in faith. The leader kept his desk free of trophies. He walked past the prison sometimes at dusk without stopping, a man measuring the city's pulse by the tone of evening prayer and the quietness of a gate. On the radio, the host reran, by accident or design, the clip from that first night when Ibrahim called in and asked where the receipts went. It sounded quaint now, like the start of a rumor that never became a riot. Listeners did not clutch their phones. They let the words pass into the air as if returning a borrowed cup. A schoolteacher began using the gateboard as a lesson in fractions. A magistrate in a neighboring town sent a note, "Could you share the template for your dashboard?" A guard, young enough to have considered the old ways as a rumor, conducted the gatewalk for recruits with the seriousness of a martial drill, urging cadence, name, charge, statute, notify, breathe. The recruits rolled their eyes because people continue to be people. The drill worked anyway because repetition does not require belief to create habit. The city held its other wounds, because cities always do, but in this one place the perverse incentive finally admitted its exile. The ban on visitor card fees meant that families kept small money for medicine and for the small luxury of sweetened tea after bad news. The canteen's new contract meant no one had to barter cigarettes for pads. The door counted differently. It learned that its noblest function was not to swell, but to watch carefully and to prefer the moment a person left it behind. The breath that had once shortened around the gate learned a normal length. This is not romance. It is a routine that made room for the ordinary dignity that always feels like a miracle while being only the correct function of parts. When Awa passed the gate on a bus, she looked up from her tools bag and out the window. She did not flinch. She saw the neem tree, the listening bench, a woman sitting there with a file that looked lighter than files used to look. She imagined the timer beeping somewhere inside, a small kitchen sound ushering law into its hour. She exhaled, not in relief, but in rhythm. The city did not applaud. It went on counting things that matter on boards that do not need speeches. And if anyone asked where the justice came from, those who were there would point not to a hero, but to a ledger that was taught to wait its turn, to a door that learned to listen, to a breath that once was taxed and now was free, and to the boredom that follows good policy when it becomes culture. Thank you for spending this time with us. If the story resonated, stay with the work. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that systems can change and doors can learn to listen. And if you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe.